Hi everybody, it's Jim from Sprague Woodturning. Welcome to this week's video. So this week it's going to be an all resin bowl set. And if you remember, these are pieces that are left over from the resin strip nested bowl set. I'll link that video at the end of this video if you want to check that out. But essentially it's leftover resin that I kept pouring into a cup and then cut into strips and then used them in a bowl set. So these are the offcuts from that. So the one thing that I do want to do is get rid of the bandsaw marks that are in them. Bandsaw marks are quite aggressive on these. So I figured that we would see that in the final work. So it's probably best to clean that all off and to give the resin a good tooth to bond to these resin strips. It was a little tedious to do, but I did actually manage to keep the skin on my fingers too, because I going into this, I was thinking that I might actually lose a fair bit, but I didn't, so that's good. The other thing is a lot of dust on these pieces afterwards, so it's important to clean off all that residue so that it doesn't end up in the final product. Stone or mold release is a good choice for this, and as you can see, we're using a plastic bowl as our form. This week we're going to use Deep Cast from Designer Epoxy. In this project, I think we used somewhere around 3 liters of epoxy. Yeah, somewhere around there. These are the new pigments. This is liquid pigment, and this is a super white, and it's a concentrated pigment from Designer Epoxy. I wanted this piece. I didn't want to be able to see through it at all, but I wanted a really good contrasting color, and I figured that the white would do that. And to be honest with you, I don't think that we've really even done a white project. So that's another reason why I decided to use white in this project. On the mixing bucket itself, you'll see a couple of lines that I've marked on the side. I'm a little gun shy after the failed lemon glitter platter. So from now on, I think that I'll do this, and that way it's just easier to pour the epoxy correctly. Along with the resin strips, you'll see kind of some resin blobs, and what I did was I mixed up a bunch of resin, mixed up different pigments with it, and poured it onto plastic and let it set. So I figured that it may give us a little bit of a flame look, and I'm really going for a total random look here. I could have laid these in better, but that's not really what I was going for. So I just chucked them into the bowl and hope for the best. And I organized them a little bit, but for the most part, it's very random. The other good thing about combining resin pieces with resin is that they're heavy enough that they don't float. So you don't have to have any mechanical means to hold them in place while they cure. Yeah, so this is the last batch of resin. It may be a little more than 3 liters, but it's certainly right around there. I thought that I would show this again. So this is acetone and it's in a glass jar. It's probably best to use a glass jar with a metal lid. I did have the acetone in a plastic container and it started to melt that container. I don't know if that's the same for all plastics, but it certainly won't do it with the glass. And it does a really good job cleaning up all that residue. This is 72 hours later, and as you can see, the stoner mold release certainly did a good job keeping the casting from sticking to the bowl. And I'll be honest with you, when I first started this, I'm kind of like, I don't know if I'm going to like this. But that's kind of the first look that we get. And, at this point, I'm thinking, oh, maybe it's going to look pretty neat. So that's a Cuts-All sander, and I'm just taking away any of the epoxy that was protruding through the top of the casting and taking away that razor sharp edge that's left from casting as well. That's a little gauge that I use on my circle cutting jig. And so I just laid it on top of the casting in order to find center, and then used a Forstner bit for the drive center on that's mounted in the chuck. There's already a little divot left over from casting from the plastic bowl itself, so no need to find center because it's already there. So again, drilled the hole and then just use another Forstner bit that's about the size of the live center on my tailstock. And there you can see both of them. So of course that was a real-time clip. Some have mentioned that they kind of missed the sounds. I think most people are happy with this video format, especially when the video is at, say, 10 times the speed. It really actually whistles really loud. So that's kind of one of the ways, or one of the reasons why I went to this format. So, again, these all resin projects, it's really bad. It wraps around everything that's moving. When you have resin and wood combos, a lot of times the wood will break and then you don't tend to have so much wrapping around all the rotating pieces on the lathe. So, it's irritating to say the least, because you have to keep using the blowgun to blow it all off so that you can actually see what you're doing. And the other thing too is if it gets long enough and it starts wrapping around and slapping your hand, that's not exactly the funnest either. So there's the first kind of look at what we're going to have, and I'm really starting to warm up to this. It's certainly probably one of these pieces that you're really going to love or you're really going to hate. So since this is an all resin piece and I'm going to core this piece, I figured that we would try the hot melt glue method here. I didn't want to rely solely on a tenon on this large piece. I haven't had the best of luck using resin tenons when coring, so I figured that this would be a good alternative to it. So here I'm just using the 5/8 bowl gouge from David Ellsworth, and I'm just cutting this tenon down to the point where I figure that it's going to be the best to hold the piece. Now, just because it's a large tenon doesn't mean that you've got the best grip on it. So I actually took this down so it was just a little, probably in between the largest setting and the smallest setting. And that way, when you use your clamping pressure from the jaws, it will really bite into that well and hold well. I should also mention that I'm using the Hercules here from Hunter Tool Systems, and in the description down below, there are discount codes to Hunter Tool Systems, Designer Epoxy, Starbond Adhesives, and of course, sandpaper.ca. All your discount codes are in the description down below, so if you need any stuff, please go down there and check them out. I'm very fortunate to have these sponsors, so thanks again to them for sponsoring my channel and providing discount codes for the turners that watch my videos and use the products that I use as well. Now I could have put this glue block on when we first started, but I wanted to make sure that the piece was round first of all. I wasn't sure if there was any, if the bowl had deformed any when it was curing. And here I'm just cutting down that tenon so it's a reasonable size before we get ready for coring here. The one last thing that I wanted to do was to make sure that it was actually running true on the very top of the bowl as well, because I mean that's where the most of the mass is going to be. So it's important that that's running true before we actually do any coring. And here I'm just using a hand, so I'll cut this off. I could have gone through here with the parting tool, but why risk losing a project like this? This is the safe way to do it, and I recommend doing it this way.
All right, we're all set up, ready for coring. We're about to see just how strong that hot melt glue joint is. I've got my Core Pro cutter in. I have no idea what this is, probably cut number 60, somewhere around there. As you can see, I've got tailstock support in. I'm going to go for the biggest core, and then we'll get the smaller ones afterwards. I definitely want tailstock support with this all resin piece. So that's kind of why I'm doing it. Ideally, you take the smallest bowl out and then the next one, and so on and so on. But in this case, I can't use tailstock support when I'm doing that. So I think this is a safer way to do this. So anyway, I've got my number 2 knife set in. Let's see how we do.
I will say I'm a little surprised that actually the resin probably cores easier than, well, there's no probably, it does core easier than the wood and resin projects that I've done in the past. Uh, you have to have very, very gentle pressure when doing this. If you do push too hard, you will have some issues. There's no doubt about that. So as long as you just keep gentle pressure on the knife set, it will cut through this stuff like butter. Now, of course, the one thing that you really truly want to avoid is cutting through this piece completely. If that happens, then of course, either the big bullets on the outside or the smaller cores that are on the inside of this can go flying. And there's a good chance that an all resin piece like this, if it hits the floor with any amount of velocity, it's certainly going to maybe break in half or maybe even potentially explode. So, you'll see here at the end, I keep trying this to trying to break it free without cutting it off. And eventually, I think maybe, yeah, I don't get it here. It takes me about 3 attempts, and then eventually it comes out. There, we're all good to go. And that's what the inside looks like. So at this point, I'm saying, yeah, and I really like the look of this. It's going to be really cool. Here I've got the core reversed, and I decided to turn tenon on the bottom of this, given that, it's not a whole lot of mass now. This is the Osprey, and it's a good choice to get in close to that live center. The Hercules will have a tough time getting in there to do what it's doing. So I really like this tool for that. You also could have used a parting tool, but again, high speed steel and carbide, there is no comparison as far as cutting resin is concerned. So yeah, just cleaning up the tenon here with the parting tool, and I'm thinking as long as I got tailstock support, it should be fine. Or at least I'm hoping that's how it's going to be. And once this core comes out of there, I'm looking at this and going, this is pretty cool. I like. So we've got the core mounted in the chuck now. The only oddball thing that I encountered here was I was using my number 2 knife set when I probably should have switched to my number 1. And the Core Pro cutter, when it engaged the resin, was actually cutting on the left wing as opposed to the very center tip. Regardless, it still worked fine. And again, trying to be careful not to cut this piece completely off. I didn't even really think that I was going to maybe do much with this. I decided to finish this. And I probably could have got 4 bowls out of this, but I was going for the sure thing because I wasn't exactly sure how this all resin piece was going to pan out. I've never done this before, so I thought I would give it a try. I just kept pressure on the support for for the coring rig, and it went in and cleaned that nub off in the very base of the bowl. So here I'm cutting off the tenon that I glued on, and that's because I want to put a waste block on it, and that way it can move outboard and work comfortably to continue, thinning out this piece to the dimension that we want. So that's why I decided to go in this direction. And I've got it mounted in my coal jaws, and I could have turned away that little nub, so I decided to grind it down with some 60 grit prior to putting the glue block on the very bottom of it. So here's the big bowl, largest core, and our little one. So here we are outboard. And again, if you're new to my channel, the reason why I like to turn outboard on left-hand threads is because I'm left-handed myself. So it's comfortable for me to turn outboard. Uh, I wanted more color, so I decided to trim the outside a little more, hoping to expose more color as we go. And there you can see the Hercules is leaving behind some pretty fine shavings. And there's what the outside of our bowl is going to look like. Working on the rim here, again, using my index finger basically as the depth gauge. This piece was pretty normal as far as turning resin is concerned. Didn't really encounter a whole lot of issues, that's for sure. Right, so we want to thin this bowl out, and now that I've been turning resin for a while now, the key to success here is just light cuts. You can see that, for the most part, I'm using the Hercules the same way that you would use a normal gouge. The only difference is you're not sharpening it every second pass or so. Uh, Measuring wall thickness, I know I say this a lot in these videos, but it's so important. Uh, Little close up there. And again, at 10 times the speed, you can really see how slow that I'm actually really going here. And we could have called this bowl any number of names. Kind of my first thought when I seen it was, like maybe, I don't know, like a kaleidoscope, maybe Fruit Loops in milk. My wife actually this morning was saying it looks kind of like the hard candy. So I'm like, yeah, you know what? I think that it probably does. So we'll do that instead of. I originally was going to call this the kaleidoscope bowl set, but we'll call it the hard candy bowl set or the candy bowl set. So, I'm not going to go real thin on this piece again because you've got a lot of resin pieces adhering to each other, and I think it's important to leave some thickness here. Certainly, the thinner it gets, the more likelihood it's not going to make it. So keep that in the back of your mind if you want to do some of this, some of these all resin pieces as well. Finally, on to sanding. These are the 3.5-inch dimple discs from sandpaper.ca, and I sand it from 60 to 800. And this the only thing that I notice about these as opposed to the resin and wood combos is the sandpaper can load up pretty quickly. I'll show here in an upcoming clip where I use the belt cleaner. You can get these from sandpaper.ca as well, and it does a good job taking off all that resin that has clogged up the sandpaper. So this is the brown triple E buffing compound from the Be All buffing system. And again, I could have wet sanded and gone much higher, but this is a tried and true method and it's working for me, so I'm going to stick with it. And of course, cleaning up with denatured alcohol before we decide what we're going to do with this piece as far as finish is concerned.
All right, so before we do the finish, I'm kind of a little torn. I know that this is an all resin project and technically it really doesn't need any finish put on it. Like the Waterlux that I've used recently, here's that can there, and or salad bowl finish by General Finish or wood bowl finish. So putting all those finishes on there will make this piece 100% food safe, but I don't really know if that's the direction I should go in. I have used this in the past. This is McGuire's Plastics, and I don't see where it isn't food safe on here. I mean, it is a wax, but I don't think that would have any issues putting this on this product and say using it as a fruit bowl or like nuts or whatever, that kind of stuff, as long as it's not liquidy. So, I think that I'm just going to polish the plastic with this. And I got this at Canadian Tire here in Canada. If you're curious, I think I used it on one of the night lights. So anyway, that's my thought process. By all means, chime in and tell me what you think you would have done. The knock on any surface applied finish, of course, is if it gets scratched, it's tougher to fix. Where whoever buys this bowl set could buy this and probably polish any scratches out. So that's kind of why I'm leaning towards using this. Anyway, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Anyway, we'll let that sit for a little bit, and then we'll buff it off with a clean cotton cloth. I will say the instructions are kind of vague. It doesn't say how long you're supposed to wait or anything like that.
Now, again, there's a debate out there about using rags on the lathe, but you really have no choice here. You cannot use paper towel here. It is not going to buff the same way that these cotton rags will.
Still see some little fine scratches. I mean, it's probably nothing, but well, you know what I'm like. So I can try something else. I'm gonna try buffing it as I put it on until it dries. Kind of like you would do a friction polish. That's 1200 RPM. Pretty much looks the same. Well, what do you think? I didn't think that I would like this as much as I do, I'll be honest with you. Very busy, no doubt about it. I'm just trying to get the camera to pick up those fine scratches. If you look up here, a little tough to see. So, you know, like I said, I think that this is maybe the way to go. I certainly could get a better shine with a film finish. So, I don't know. I think this is the way to go. The great thing about this is I could do the bottom on this and call her done. I mean, that's the great thing about this, just putting the polish on it. All right, I'll do the other two and then I'll bring you in after I get them all polished up and we'll have a chat about them. All right, there's the largest core. I must say, it's pretty cool. I do like this little, where is it? Little sliver right there. Just maybe the corner of one of those little resin blocks. Very cool. All right, number 3 coming right up. All right, well, there's the last one. There's just one little piece of white resin in there. Very, very hard to sand. There's a little divot there. You can't even hardly feel it. But those 3.5-inch discs are about as large as this. So the smaller 2.5 or 2-inch would probably be better in this case, but don't have, because I typically don't make stuff this small. All right, well, I'll see you when we're doing the bottoms.
So here we are back with the parting tool, the 3/16-inch parting tool from Crown. Again, I've said it in the past. It's the only time I really get nervous when I'm doing these pieces. If you're using this method in your inboard, you could bring up tailstock support to make sure that you don't lose the bowl. But being on the outboard end of the lathe, you don't have that luxury. So here we are reversed on the vacuum chuck doing the bottoms. And I started with the Hercules here, but all that hot melt glue was really kind of clogging up the cutter. So this is where the 5/8 bowl gouge will probably do a better job of cleaning that up. And just put it on its side. It was freshly sharpened, but I could already tell it was starting to get dull. So back with the Hercules again. And there's a little divot there from where I used the drill bit earlier when I mounted it between centers. So I decided to give this a profile so the bowl's sitting on a smaller foot than I normally do. So I thought that we would get away without using any Starbond this week. And lo and behold, there's a couple of cracks on the very bottom. So this is the Starbond thin, and I just set it with the accelerator. That way we can carry on with our project. That's what it looked like before it goes back on the vacuum chuck. Now I thought I would leave this in. That kind of shows you what I go through when I mount these pieces. I just kind of use my finger as a reference point and keep moving around until it runs true. And of course, we want to cut away any of that CA glue. You don't want to leave that on the surface prior to sanding because it will clog up your sandpaper. So it's always best to trim that away before you do any sanding. So I think I started sanding at 120, I think it was 120 to 800 on the base of these bowls. And same thing as the rest of the bowl. Use the brown triple E on the very bottom. And then, of course, clean up with the denatured alcohol so we don't have any of that residue left over. So here, there's a couple of clips coming up. It just shows the very bottoms of the other two bowls being done. Same idea. And this is kind of neat. I thought you might want to see this as well. I made an adapter. I think I used that to turn one of the night lights actually. And it was a little finicky to get the bowl to run true, but eventually I get it good enough that I think that it's not going to affect it. I decided to use an engraver on the bottom of this. Since there's not going to be any finish on this, you can write on this resin, and then if you're really careful, you can lightly put the finish over top of it and it will preserve it. But since there's no finish, I figured this was the direction that I should go with this, and it actually worked better than I thought it was going to. I could have filled it with black resin, uh, whatever. I didn't bother with that. I figured that this was good enough. The one thing that I did do was take some white diamond buffing compound, again from the BL buffing system, and buff the very bottom to try and take off any high ridges that there were.
All right, let's get a last little look at this beautiful bowl set. I'm telling you right now, I'm digging this. I 100% was unsure of it. If you've got a bunch of resin pieces laying around, throw them in a bowl form, chuck some epoxy in on top of it, and see what you get. 100% really. What I really like about these, you know, even though these had squared off edges, you know, they've got points on them now, and that's just because they're on the curve. Very, very cool. Here's the back side. Trying a different lighting setup. Let me know what you think. I could have colored these. I could have maybe even taken some black marker and put these in here, but I don't think there's any need for it. It's quite clear to me that it's there, and over time it may fill in with dust and it'll be even more prominent then. Lots of different colors, pearl pigments, you name it. That gold right there on the base is pretty cool too. So yeah, this one is 10 by 3 and is by far the coolest. There's the biggest core. It's 7 by 1.5 inches. Just load it with color as well. Of course, there's the very bottom. First one I think is about 5/8 of an inch thick. This one here is about an inch. I didn't actually measure these. Yeah, so 7 by 1.5. And the last one is our tiny little white bowl here. Very, very small, very thin. Here's the very bottom. Camera focus on that. So, you know, it's a little tough to sand because of the size of it and the size of the discs that I have. But we got it done. I did see some scratches in this earlier, so I might buff this some more to get rid of those. But other than that, these are all ready to go. This set is for sale. I'm going to keep it together. I'm not going to disclose the price here in case it's a present, so I got to stop doing that on here. So anyway, just send an email to spraguewoodturning@gmail.com and we can work out the price and the shipping details. So, you know, I'll be honest with you, when I started on this, I was like, yeah, I don't know. I don't know how this is going to look, but you know, I'm so glad that I did. One of the benefits of working with resin is that it's endless. The colors are endless, and the things you can create seem to be almost endless as well. Being a wood turner for over 20 years and just strictly working with wood when I first started, and then progressing to inlays, working with natural materials, I'll be honest with you, it was getting boring. I had made just about everything that I thought that I could make with those materials, and then along comes epoxy and all the pigments. You know, Designer Epoxy, fantastic product. If you're not trying them, please try them. So, you know, along comes all this, and you know, it's, to me, it's for me, it's where I want to be right now. I come out here and it has really opened my creativity and my creative mind, where I was kind of stuck in a rut before working with epoxy. So, you know, if you're kind of there as a wood turner, get some epoxy and get some pigments and mix them up and try them. You know, for me, it's really rejuvenated my outlook on wood turning and woodworking in general. So anyway, enough on that. Anyway, let me know what you think about this week's video. Please leave a comment down below. Of course, that's where we're going to get the next winner of the 40,000 subscriber giveaway bowl. We're going to pick from the comments. Next week, we've got something coming up that I've never done on the channel, so please come on back for that. I'm not going to give it away as to what it's going to be, but hopefully it's going to be pretty neat. Well, that's it. Till next week, take care, stay safe. Don't forget that bell. See you next week.